Afternoon, everybody. It's a real, as always, it's a real honor, privilege to get a chance to talk to you about a book in the Bible and to try and spend time together, just wading through it and wrestling with it together and trying to make sense of this idea that Jude's opened up and Matt has read about, particularly with those two proverbs at the end. This idea of wisdom. So this is a 2-point sermon. Each point's going to last about 7 or 8 minutes. So if your attention span is 7 or 8 minutes, then pick the second one. But let's go for it. So hang on in the 2-point sermon. First point is wisdom is hard to find because of the times that we live in. That's the first one. Wisdom's hard to find because of the times that we live in. I think this is what, or part of what Solomon, if you've sat down and tried to read through this book of Proverbs, this is part of what Solomon is saying. It's certainly there between the lines. Wisdom's hard to find because of the days and the times that we live in. He talks about paths all the time, and he talks about the way that we can easily get swept along with stuff. Second point is that, and I'm trying not to sound too airy-fairy when I say this. It's a bit of an airy-fairy point. True enlightenment is possible. Real wisdom is possible. I think that is what the message of Proverbs in the big picture of the Bible is, that true, real hair on your back of your neck, making sense of the whole world is possible. But it depends on how you see your stuff and value your stuff. So those are the 2 points. Wisdom's hard to find because of the times, but real wisdom is possible for us, even in the middle of the times. I want us to think about an expression that I've certainly heard a lot. You might have heard it as well, quite a bit too. It's the expression "wise after the event." We say it quite a lot, don't we? Or we consider it quite a lot. You can be wise after the event. It speaks of the kind of clarity that we get when we're able to move ourselves away from the moment and the situation and look back. You get wisdom then. You think, and if you've just had a barney with somebody or something like that in the heat of the day, you look back and you've got all sorts of things. I don't know if you've ever done this. I do this a lot. You think, oh, I should have said this, or I should have said that. Not just a barney, any kind of conversing that you might want to do, and you've got this clarity of thought that comes outside of the moment. That's kind of what it reminds us of when we think about that saying, wise in the event or after the event. You can be, I'm going to use an example from the driving seat. You can be a polite, law-abiding, road-worthy citizen, but if you've missed your lunch, if you're on a bit of a sugar low, if you've had a long day and you're tired, and you're caught up in the emotional rawness of a traffic accident, anything can come out of your mouth. There's not, finding wisdom then is tricky, impossible. And we have head explosions, don't we? The thing is with this, and I think we sense it as people, I think the Bible describes it, the Bible writes about it, and Solomon is at pains to point it out, I think, to make the argument. We live in the big event. We live in the moments. There's so much of our lives that we can't step outside of. Our lives are so busy. There's so much of a flow and a rhythm. There's so many patterns that we are just carried along with and get swept up in. There's always people struggling to get money. There's always stories of people wrestling to keep going. There's people trying to find popularity, to stay popular. We've got people who have had whole life struggles with sort of things like self-acceptance, or dealing with racial abuse or job insecurity, and any one of a number of things. The way that our world has these patterns that we just get, in the busyness, we can get easily absorbed and lost and carried along into. And in Proverbs, Solomon writes about sort of how this pads out, the way this goes, the way that we get caught up in it. Proverbs 29, 12. So the few proverbs here which just help us to think through this idea that we get caught in the storm of life. And what that means. If a ruler listens to lies, all his officials become wicked. The rich rule over the poor, and the borrower is slave to the lender. It kind of reminds us how often and how sort of easily the world that we live in and its systems and its patterns can get corrupted. And then, the second one, 22:7, sort of talks about the way that these systems that we live in, these patterns of life, the paths, can easily separate and discriminate, or cause us to discriminate or be discriminated against. Proverbs 13:23 says that an unplowed field produces food for the poor, but injustice sweeps it away. This is talking, I think, about the sort of collective consequences of the sweeping patterns of life that we live. It sort of says the earth's got enough. I think this is what the proverb is saying. I mean, you have a wrestle with it yourself. Proverbs 13:23 says something like, at least to me, there's enough food on this field. There's enough food on this earth. But the patterns of life that we absorb, that we get lost in, the injustice that comes out of that means that some are going to go without, even though there's enough. And there's this flow to life, isn't there? Proverbs 14:12 says, and I think this is, there's times when he talks about it collectively in Proverbs, and I've tried to pick out one that gets us to think about that. And there's times when the consequences of living in the sort of storm of life and getting caught in the flow of it stops us from seeing what it might be like to be wisdom. And sometimes that becomes really personal. So he writes in 14:12, there's a way that appears to be right, but in the end, it leads to death. Let me just summarize some of this thought. Life's a bit of a whirlwind. It's not very easy to step back from things. And it's hard to be wise in a world like that. Just being human means you can easily get caught up, immersed in, shaped by, or party to, or even, as that last one says, even wrecked by the speed of this world. And it's so hard for us to be wise. So how if life can be an event like this? And maybe you're hearing this and you're thinking, I've not found that in lockdown. I've been pretty chill. I've had a chance to reflect. It's not really been my experience, even in lockdown. I feel like life is so hard to step back from. It's so hard to remove yourself from the flow of life and take a good look. And therefore, wisdom is so hard to find, I think. And yet, I said at the start, point 2, we're already there, that real wisdom is possible, but it depends on how you choose to value your stuff, or how you look at things, should we put it like that? And one of the things that we've tried to say as we've made our way through this series in Proverbs is that all these little pithy bits of wisdom, indeed, all of Scripture finds its ultimate meaning, even in the kind of chaos that we're talking about, in Jesus. Everything's found in Jesus. It's all heading there. So when we look at Jesus's life, there's a sense in which we can look at it and go, there's so much of just what he does, the words that fall from his mouth, the occasions that he's in are making sense. Are making sense of other parts of the Bible, but they're making sense even of our very search for wisdom. Jude read that passage at the start from Corinthians, which talks about this idea that right at the center of the wisdom is a cross. Right at the center of wisdom is this man, Jesus. That's the kind of thing that we're thinking about. And so every situation that we come across with Jesus, there's an explanation. So if we're serious about looking for what wisdom means, then we find ourselves, if you're a Christian and if you read the Bible the way I do, we find ourselves looking at this man Jesus to try and make sense of it. So we've got this moment here that I want us to read through together. It's in Matthew 22:15, where we see, I think, a lot of the whirlwind of life come to a head. a lot of the kind of dilemma that we find, if as moral people or as Christian people, when we're trying to live a wise life, and yet we find that in the whirlwind that we're in, that it's a struggle. The injustice that we see, or the speed of life, or whatever it is, just catches out and mean that living a wise life becomes tricky. And we see an example like that here in this passage, Matthew 22, 15 to 22. You've got this Jewish, the Jewish nation are in a real dilemma in trying to live a wise life. And the dilemma is they've been called to be this holy nation. And they've picked this up and they've tried to run with it. So they've got this way of living, and yet they're doing that in and amongst, to that point, the greatest empire that there has ever been, the Roman Empire, in which the guy at the top of the chain says that he's God, and he demands, total allegiance. And they're trying to live these sanctified, sanitized lives, and yet their dilemma is that they're kind of ruined with anger at having their home, their holy places, their way of life undermined. And their plight, and this is the sort of the hub of the story, is sort of crystallized, as it is today often, and by the subject of taxes. Gets everybody going, doesn't it? The idea of taxes. As soon as it doesn't say poll tax in the version that I read, but when Matthew read it out with his Irish lilt, my eyes jumped up. Taxes grabs our interest, doesn't it? Matthew 22, 15 to 22 says this: Then the Pharisees went out. They laid plans to trap him in his words. They sent their disciples to him along with the Herodians. I've not heard of the Herodians before. I'm guessing their gang didn't have as much traction as the Pharisees and the Sadducees, who we hear a bit more about. So I don't know much about them. But they were there trying to trip Jesus up. And they say, "Teacher, we know that you're a man of integrity," trying to trip him up, "and that you teach the way of God in accordance with the truth." And then they sort of pour honey down his throat, don't they, with this bit? They say, "You aren't swayed by others because you pay no attention to who they are. Tell us then, what's your opinion?" So this is the trap being set. "Is it right to pay the imperial tax to Caesar or not?" But Jesus, knowing their evil intent, said, "You hypocrites, why are you trying to trap me? Show me the coin used for paying the tax." They brought him a denarius, and he asked them, "Whose image is this, and whose inscription?" "Caesar's," they said. So here's what's going on. And I think as we look at this conundrum for Jesus, you could almost say that this same dilemma that we face, how do we live wise in a messed up world, is almost crystallized in this moment. It's the same. The Jewish nation are having the same dilemma that we can face today as good or moral people trying to live a wise life. They're trying to live a wise life. They're trying to do what's right, and yet they're just in these impossible circumstances under Roman rule. And Jesus is set up to fail in this moment, and yet you read at the end, everybody goes away amazed. Jesus triumphs. What does he do? What does he say? Jesus says to them, "Pass me a coin." It's kind of beautiful, I think, already that he doesn't have one. And if you want to know whether Jesus pays taxes or not, have a look in Matthew 17, 24 to 26 to see whether he does. Don't look right now. Stick with me. But the answer's there. And then Jesus asks, and it looks almost incidental, but it's not. He asks them, "Whose image is on the coin?" And Jesus, in this moment, it's not an incidental question. He's really trying to draw attention to a certain point. He's trying to get them to look at this coin and see Caesar's mug on it, but also see the inscription that declares him to be like a god. Jesus wanted them to see this image. But more than that, he's thinking about the emphatic point he's going to come to and he's going to make. He wants them to think about the significance of Caesar's coin bearing his image. That's the significance, that's the word that he puts in their head, this idea of image. And whilst they're mulling over this, maybe passing the coin around, Jesus says to them, give to Caesar what's Caesar's, as they're passing the coin around and working this dilemma out, and give to God what's God's. And because the audience is majority Jewish, they're going to know the creation story like the back of their hand. And when Jesus utters these words, God and image, in the same breath, they're going to be reminded in a way that perhaps the Romans or other people listening wouldn't have been reminded of the incredible privilege, the huge significance of being a created person, created in the image of God. And they would have been thinking through the sort of question, where then is God's image? And they would have found the answer, or it would have dropped on them, the penny would have dropped for them, that their image was, God's image was in them. God's image is us. We are his image. We are bearers of who he is. We represent him. And it's just this amazing bit of wisdom that Jesus finds, because you've got this, he's been set up to fail, and yet the Romans are happy. He's given them an answer. They're happy. Yeah, pay Caesar what's Caesar's. And Jesus has said that, and he's not bypassed, the pressures or the circumstances of the time. He's dealt with the moment. He's not overlooked it. It's not just some hypothetical religious answer. He's embraced the moment. He said, yeah, you've got to, this is where you're living. You can pay this guy. Pay your dues. This is the reality for you. But he's saying something way bigger than that. He's like saying, sure, do what you need to do to get through the day. But you need to know in thinking about this, there is something way more significant that you're indebted to. Some of the versions use the word render, and it's this idea of, you maybe have heard that, render to Caesar what's Caesar's, render to God what is God's. It's this idea that you pay back what it's worth. Jesus is saying to us saying to them and to us in this moment, sure, give time and give weight to the wisdoms and the way of the world. Give Caesar his coin back. Give consideration to the world that you're living in, but and base some of your life on that, but only so much as it's worth. That's what he says to him. Think about what it's worth, and then compare it. And this is what he's saying: give unto God what is God's, and then compare it to what God has done, to what God has done for us, and what you might owe him. Think about whose image that you bear. And he says to him, I think this is the wisdom that Jesus imparts. He says, no matter whatever's going on right now, no matter how messy it is, no matter the whirlwind that you're in, and no matter how relentless life is, no matter how rigid the sort of patterns that you're in, he says, always know, always consider that you're a child of God. Always remember your position as an image bearer. Always consider your eternal circumstances. He says to him, this is the way to get through. This is what wisdom is. It's wisdom that can survive the whirlwind of life. Proverbs 1:7 says, hopes placed in mortals die with them. All the promise of their power comes to nothing. This proverb points to the way that we can sometimes do that. We can sometimes be so focused on what even like the most amazing things that are around us, and yet they all come to nothing. Proverbs ultimately points us up to something bigger all the time. This pattern of wisdom, I think, in order to imbibe it, it's the reason that we've got a cross in this story. If you go far enough with me to think, yeah, this perhaps could be a wise way to live. one of the things that will happen is in the rat race world that we live in, the things that we respond to, the way that we sort of govern our life, are the things that are most immediate, that shout loudest, that are right in front of our noses. God says to us, I think, in this story, that you're going to need a reminder at the heart of it in order to live a wise life that draws your eye, not to what's immediately in front of you, not to the immediate problems, but onto bigger things, crucially onto just how much you are loved by the Creator God, just how costly the sacrifice is. That's why we've got a cross at the heart of the story, because if we're going to live wise, if we're going to access this storyline, then we're going to have to be moved. We're going to have to be moved out of the moment, we're going to have to be wise after the event. And God looks at us in love, I think, and says, I'm going to need to shout up. I'm going to need to shout up in love and get them to look above themselves. I'm going to need to give them a story to save them. And so we have the cross. Wisdom's hard to find, and because of the times that we live in. But here's the hope, people. True wisdom, the heart of wisdom, is possible, but it depends on how you look at your stuff. Let me finish by reading the verse that Jude started with. It talks about this idea. Now, you may be wrestling with, what this idea of wisdom is. Here's what Paul said to the church at Corinth. It's not up on the text, but listen to it with me. Jews demand miraculous signs. Greeks look for wisdom. We preach Christ crucified. It's a stumbling block to Jews and foolishness to Gentiles. But to those who God have called, both Jews and Greeks, it's the power of God and the wisdom of God. The foolishness of God is wiser than man's wisdom, and the weakness of God is stronger than man's strength. Do you see what that passage is saying there? I don't know what we're going to chat about afterwards. I don't know what Jude's going to throw at me, but we think, don't we? Can we access this story by our cleverness? Can we get underneath it by, wrestling with it with our, with all our levels of intelligence? Can we keep it by rules? Can we do that? And God says to us in his word, almost, this is the most foolish thing that you can imagine. He says the height of wisdom you'll find in the cross. So the Bible says to us, the cleverest point you can reach in your life is to wrestle with this cross. Because in wrestling with this cross, you'll have access to all of the wisdom of God. And in wrestling with this cross, you might just be able to exit this, the relentless life that you live in, and see a bigger picture. That's what it means to live wise.
Thanks for staying with us. Ash, nice to have you back as well. I'm glad you stayed with us.
Yeah.
If you'd done a runner, we'd have been in trouble.
Well, you'd have been in trouble. I'd have been fine.
And I should just say that if you have any questions about what Ash has been talking about today or our series in Proverbs, then please do message in. We like hearing from you. Or if that's something that you'd want to chat about, maybe face-to-face or in a bit more of a private way, then please get in touch with the church at our email address, and we'd love to talk about that too.
Do you do that? Yeah.
Interesting stuff, Ash. I've got a few questions to fire your way.
I'm thankful for the chance. Sometimes when you preach, I miss the chance to see people on the door and have them go, so what were you trying to say? I saw you might have, you really miss that. And so some weeks, some weeks you feel like you've said everything you need to say, and other weeks you think this is a roundabout way of saying, yeah, maybe it's worth ironing out some of the things that were in there. And another reflection would be our house has been the whirlwind that I was trying to describe this week, hasn't it? And stopping.
You don't need to tell everyone about the whirlwind of our house, but yeah.
Well, yeah, but Sometimes it is, isn't it? Sometimes life's like that, and it's really hard to be able to step back
Yeah.
and be wise. And I think Solomon's saying that. Sorry,
I
go.
think one of the things that I'm kind of curious about and just want to explore a little bit more is that idea that we find it hard to find wisdom in the times. And I think probably one of the things that spring to mind is just, I want to say, do we find it hard? Because we have Google now. I can literally search anything that I need to know in terms of, knowledge and education wise. It's, worldwide. You would maybe be good to argue that our
Yeah,
education system worldwide is, as good as it's ever been in the history of the world, and yet we're
and we
still
learn at
finding it
great.
hard to
We learn at
be
we learn at great
wise.
pace now. We learn at great pace now, and we could add to that. You can learn in.
Scientific advancements, all
We
that kind of
can.
stuff.
There's all that kind of stuff, and we can learn in the struggle. What that was one of my reflections. So we're not without learning in that moment, but I do think that saying rings true. I do think we're often wise after the event, and often in life we're not able to step out. You have those moments, don't you, on holiday? Oh, well, we do. I know that we do, and I'm guessing that other people do as well. Or you go for a long walk and you end up actually talking, and you're in that moment where you step out far enough to speak with some real wisdom, that reflects back on, oh, do I need to do this job for the rest of my life? Am I enjoying this? All those, like the bigger, deep-seated stuff, I'd say wisdom conversations come out. Yeah, and I would say that in the world that we live in, I think that's quite hard to find. And one of the other things I was trying to say as well is I think it can be hard to find when we're caught up in like inequality struggles. So one of the things I was hoping to say, maybe I didn't say it very well, was certainly the way that the Israelites in that moment would have really find, I think, being wise difficult because of the injustice they were facing. Sometimes it's hard to get a wise head
Unfair.
on, just because it's so it's so unfair what's been asked. And we get that every time we turn the radio on or the news on. We just are reminded with this great unfairness, and it skews everything, doesn't it? It skews it all.
So what you're saying, sorry, I'm going to summarize what I think what you're trying to say. What you're saying is that we do maybe have more knowledge and insight in lots of areas in compared to the rest of history, but because of the busyness and kind of rat race and all that kind of stuff, actually applying that knowledge so it becomes a wisdom is difficult.
Maybe I think you're saying that. I'm just saying it's. I think so Solomon wrote this. I guess before there was as much of a rat race, and I think he was writing that it was hard. I think he was writing that it was hard then.
Okay.
I think there's.
So there's always a rat race.
Yeah, there's always a rat race, or there's always a reason to find it difficult to step back enough to find wisdom. It's not the only way you find wisdom, but it is one of the ways that you find wisdom.
Okay, so I think I can go with that. Like the idea that stepping back, seeing the big picture is a helpful thing, and I don't think that's exclusive to Christianity. I don't think that
No.
A bit of mindfulness, taking time out, all that kind of thing, that's not something that is just in Christianity. What makes Christianity so special or unique, or is it unique or special in that kind of thing? One of the things you said today was comparing our value in God's eyes rather than just comparing it to the Caesar of the day or that kind of thing. What do you think about that?
Just to explain that a bit more. Sorry.
So I guess I'm just saying.
Seeing as we're chatting.
You're just making me work hard.
Yeah.
What's so special about Christianity when you have your Christian glasses on and you take a step back to look at the big picture? How is that different from not having Christian glasses on and just taking a step back to look at a big picture?
Yeah. So
is that clearer?
Yeah. So good work. There's. I should say, by the way, what we said before the chat, we said, let's just go for it. Let's just talk and have it out and see if we get to the bottom of anything. I think always there's benefit in in stepping back. And is it different? Is that what we're saying? Does Christianity offer us anything different? I think when you read the verse that we've read in Corinthians that is sort of footnoted, or sits above everything that we've said, then I think it's hugely different. It says that there's access to levels of wisdom there yeah. So can we be wise? I think I was worried that we get into semantics of what wisdom is, and I don't want to do that. I think there's at the heart. I think the heart of God's wisdom, we're able to see that in some of the things that Jesus says. And when he says to us stuff that's so smart, like give to Caesar what Caesar's. You've got to exist here. Fine, give him that, but consider the value of that. Consider how much merit there is in that thing that you give. Consider how much weight that you put on that, and then consider. And yeah, maybe I didn't say this very well either. Consider what God gives us. Just and consider the wealth of that. Consider the significance of that. So, in earthly terms, it can look really insignificant. Kind action, walking past somebody down the street, you do something nice, this disappears into the dust. But actually, there's eternal value to that kind of thing. Sharing your hope in God might just be like one conversation, put that person never speaks to you again. Hugely significant. I think what some of the wisdom what Jesus is passing on there, he says you need to think, always have this framework in mind. Think how actually, even though your career is really important to you, think about just exactly what it's going to pay for your mortgage and all the rest of it. So it's not insignificant, it's significant, but weigh that up against the huge things, that the time when you have your friends round and have that deep and meaningful chat about the core of your faith. I think some what Jesus is saying is that it's like just that one chat, you have a curry with them.
Those things matter.
It's just, those things matter in a huge way. And I guess one of the other things I was trying to say is that we can't often get there without the cross. So again, that's another thing maybe I didn't say.
Can't ever get there maybe without the cross.
Can't
do you think?
Can't ever get there because we can't because the cross does that thing where it totally makes us reevaluate everything. And I think it's the only thing that can cause us to have that level of reevaluation.
Yeah, so when you step back from the bigger picture and actually view it through the cross, the value system is turned on its head, isn't it? Because it no longer is just about doing the right thing or doing a kind thing. Actually, where you begin with the cross is a completely different thing. Ash, you've muted. So can you hear me or not? You can't hear me. I think he wishes he has that function at home where he just can't hear me. But yeah, I think one of the things I'm going to just ignore Ash and just see what I can. I think one of the things that when we look at it through the cross, that it just changes our value system, because actually we don't come from a place of being wise. Actually, we come recognizing that we are just it's in such need of God's help, that we need him to take care of our follies and actually the mistakes that we've made and all that kind of thing. So we've totally lost Ash, and I hope that we've not lost your train of thought with our chat as well. But it's been really nice to have you with us. Maybe you can continue this conversation in your own home or with a friend over text or something like that. That would be really great. God bless you this week. We pray, and we really mean this when we do it, we pray that you will know the power of the cross in your week this week, that it will shape all your values and help you to live wise in God's eyes. And that is our prayer for you. God bless, guys. Have a great week. See you later. Take care. Bye.